Good evening, everybody. I'm Rani Avissar, the Dean of the Rosenstiel School. It's my true pleasure to welcome everybody back in person in our auditorium. We have still a policy of light density in the auditorium, and so most of our audience is going to still be on Zoom, but certainly happy after 2 years to be able to resume the presentations in person in the auditorium. We ask that everybody remain with mask during the entire presentations. Only the speaker for a few minutes, okay, can take that out. We ask also, please do not eat. In fact, we have very interesting studies that have demonstrated that as long as everybody keep their mask and avoid food in a big audience area, it's the most important parameter in preventing the COVID to propagate. In other words, that's the safest parameter. It's not even social distancing, nothing else. The wearing of the mask is kind of the most important parameter. So please, let's try to obey by those rules. I want to take this opportunity to thank the sponsor of our program, which has been lasting now for about 27 years. And a special thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Bank of America, and also the Shepard Broad Foundation, Bill Galway, Cheryl Gold, who is also an important person in this C-Secret series because she is our executive producer or executive director, helping us to identify speakers and bring them to this presentation. She is also a financial supporter of this organization. We have the Key Biscayne Community Foundation, the KB Life Enhancement Forum, the John Meekan Family Foundation, the William McKeon Trust, and Nicole and Myron Wang. I'd like to continue with a tradition that we have opened a few years ago of bringing exceptional graduate students to open the series or the evening with the presentations. And those graduate students or those alumni of the school obviously graduated from Rosenstiel and are coming to describe their experience and their professional development. So this evening, I am delighted to introduce Maribeth Arcodia. And Maribeth grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. She attended Georgetown University, where she received a bachelor's degree in mathematics in 2014. After graduation, she spent the following year volunteering with the World Teach organization as a second grade teacher in, I hope that I'm saying that correctly, Chuhok, Micronesia in the Western Pacific. Maribeth started at the Rosenstiel School in 2016 and has received her PhD in atmospheric science in December 2021, working under the supervision of Professor Ben Kurtman. She is now a postdoctoral researcher with Colorado State University using explainable artificial intelligence techniques to understand the climate predictability. Welcome, Maribeth.
Thank you, Dean Avissar, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming and for everyone on Zoom. And for C-Secrets for having me talk a little bit about my time here at the Rosenstiel School. So I started here in 2016 and I recently just finished. And so here's me as my first day as a student and then my last day as a student pictures that my mom took. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about my time here. So first, my PhD research was done under the advisorship of Dr. Ben Kurtman, who's here tonight. And I like to say I won the advisor jackpot by working with Ben. And my PhD research focused on how the tropics influence US weather. And so my research focused on storm systems out in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, which trigger atmospheric waves that then travel to the United States, ultimately impacting the weather that we see here. And here we see different rainfall patterns based on different atmospheric and oceanic conditions out here in the tropics. And so I looked mostly at the sub-seasonal time scale, which is about 2 weeks to 2 months in between the weather and climate time scales. And so it's important because heat, flooding, drought, heat waves, all of these events can occur on the sub-seasonal time scale, but we have particularly low forecast skill. But another aspect of my research was to really bring this to a localized factor, especially here in Miami. So one of the questions that we asked was, when will a place like Miami Beach have 50 or more days of flooding per year? And so this really gets at when is the sea level rise issue, which is really big for us here in Miami, going to affect the individual on my street, on my house. And so here you can see the approximate time frame of when this threshold is going to be crossed. Another question that we looked at is, are the current heat warning thresholds in Miami a good indicator of human risk? And so we have pervasive heat here, especially in the summer, and people that are particularly vulnerable to these issues. And we were assessing whether or not the current systems that we have in place are actually addressing this vulnerability. My current research is assessing climate predictability, but using machine learning techniques. So in short, we take these maps of the globe, apply these machine learning techniques, and then extract signals from the system to be able to better understand the climate predictability and explain what is going on. During my time here at Rosenstiel, I was very fortunate to be able to travel to present my research at conferences in Texas, Arizona, Washington, D.C. I attended a coding workshop in Boulder, Colorado, as well as a summer school at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. The Rosenstiel School also fosters science communication and outreach, and it's here that I really developed a passion for these things. And so on the science communication side, a group of my lab mates and I created the Seasoned Chaos blog, and this figure might look familiar from a few minutes ago. And this is from the blog where we take different climate phenomena and try to explain them in fun and understandable ways. And the blog was recently featured on a WLRN segment, which is Miami's NPR affiliate. And from the outreach side, I was lucky to be a part of both the Students for Students and Canes on Canes outreach groups, which give hurricane and climate change preparedness and science talks to local communities from elementary school up through the adult level. Additionally, I participated in the 3-minute thesis competition, which was University of Miami-wide, where I had to take my 5 years of research and condense it down into a 3-minute talk. And I was so excited because I placed first in this competition, and I was able to bring back the trophy to Rasmus for the first time. And here I am with my advisor. I call him Cyborg Ben in this picture. And I think it really just sums up the pandemic times, this photo. And so I was also part of the Marine Science Graduate Student Organization. And so this is a student-led group that has various activities as well as fundraisers for student travel, for students to be able to go to conferences. And for 2 years, I served as the merchandise chair. And so I got my hand in creating and selling a lot of the Rasmus exclusive swag that we have. And then lastly, in the final years of my time at the graduate school, I got really involved in creating a mentoring program. And so this was really an effort to retain young people, particularly underrepresented people in the geoscientific field. And so here at the Rosenstiel School, a fellow classmate of mine, Manish Devana, and myself created what we call GUM, the Graduate Undergraduate Mentoring Program, which aims to create a more unified and inclusive community through this graduate undergraduate mentoring. Since its inception, we have 6 faculty members involved. We also have 80 plus graduate mentors and 130 plus undergraduate mentors. And again, this is just a Rosenstiel only program, so I'm really excited to see where this goes in the following years. So during my time here, I was just so fortunate, from playing volleyball on the beach after work to going to Canes games and recently graduating with my friends. I'm very fortunate to have been able to do my research here at the Rosenstiel School. Thank you.
Thanks, Maribeth. Welcome back to Rosenstiel. As you know, we'll be always delighted to see you back coming and work with us, continue working with us, and hear from you and your career development. By the way, at a private school like ours, sorry, I have to do a little bit of a fundraising. It's part of the evening at a private school like ours. If we want to be able to bring students, including students that do not have necessarily the finances to be able to attend a private school, we rely heavily on the scholarships and as well as on professorships to recruit faculty. So if any of you is interested in the audience as well as on Zoom to support our activities, please contact Jennifer, and you have her email right there. Thank you in advance. This evening, it's my honor and a tremendous pleasure to welcome Shimon Elkabetz to our series. Shimon is a very interesting person, not only because of what he does, as you are going to see, but his background is also very interesting. He got interested in the weather through the experience of piloting helicopters in the military, which is a kind of an interesting machine when the weather gets really bad. And that triggers in him the desire to learn more about weather. He served in the Israeli military for 11 years, different positions and different commanding positions. He graduated from the Israeli Air Force Academy, which requires now to graduate in parallel with a bachelor degree from a university, and in his case, the University of Beersheba. And he graduated in economics. Then when he was in the US, he went also to that small school in Boston, I believe it's called Harvard, to get an MBA in business over there. He has testified in front of Congress on climate security. And Shimon, again, our true pleasure to have you here this evening. Thank you.
All right, great to be here. Thank you so much for coming to hear me out. So we're going to talk a little bit about climate security and climate adaptation specifically, a very big problem. And I know it's a very academic audience, but it will be an interesting combination of a little bit of scientific problem, a little bit of business problem, and I hope you'll find it interesting. So I'm the CEO of a company called Tomorrow.io. It's a company headquartered out of Boston that was started by myself and 2 other good friends of mine that went to MIT about the same time. And during the presentation, you'll understand a little bit what we're doing. But the first thing I want to talk about is the problem of climate adaptation and climate security. And I'm not going to tell you anything new, but most of the public is not aware of that fact. And the fact is that really weather events as a result of climate change simply become more volatile and more frequent in any given year. And the economic loss as a result of that is also staggering. Every year we see a new report coming out about the damages related to hurricanes, typhoons, and whatnot. And obviously, unfortunately, due to lack of mitigation, this is only going to accelerate. Now, when you think about this problem, what we're saying, and what I think we should all understand is that climate change is no longer something for the future. It's already here. We're already in the era of consequences, as Al Gore said. And it means that it's not enough to just think about how to get to net zero. It's also about what do we do here and now. Because we are already seeing more wildfires. We're already seeing more flood events, like what happened in New York in September. We're already seeing more hurricanes and on and on. And we need to put systems in place to start managing those risks. And really, again, when you think about climate-related technologies, where I'm coming from the startup world, where a lot of money is being thrown into all kinds of ideas. And I keep saying it every time I talk. I think a lot of the investments go into what I call P2P type of businesses, meaning privileged people solving privileged people's problems, like travel apps and dog walking apps and all kinds of things that don't really move the needle on a huge problem we're seeing. So what can we do about climate change? Generally, there are two buckets. Mitigation, how do we get to net zero? And adaptation, how do we manage the new reality? In the middle, you have all kinds of risks related to the transition. What does it mean to businesses when their entire business model is no longer sustainable and they need to reinvent themselves or think about the consequences of moving from the past to the future? But as a world, we really care about mitigation and adaptation. And I encourage business ideas and initiatives that focus on those two worlds. We're going to talk today about adaptation, okay? Meaning actions that reduce the negative impact of climate change and the more frequent and volatile weather events. For example, how to ensure that the infrastructure becomes more resilient. I'll give you a very interesting example. Heat islands in cities. Are you familiar with that problem? So obviously, it is apparent that in poor areas of the city, the temperature can be sometimes 10 Fahrenheit higher than in wealthier area of the city because of the lack of vegetation in those areas. And that creates health problems, strokes, heart attacks, and whatnot for the people who live in those areas. So one may say, okay, let's put more vegetation in that area. But what's the other problem of vegetation? It tends to fall on electricity lines when there's a storm. And when you have more storms, it's a problem. So there's additional investment that you need to make in not only vegetation, but also how to take the infrastructure and put it underground. So it's a very expensive problem. That's only one example of what can you do about adaptation. So we're going to talk more about areas related to how do we monitor, predict, and alert around weather events. So a few things we need to understand. A lot of people are thinking forward around how do we get to net zero by 2030. It's not going to happen. We need to think about that. But everybody's too focused about the long-term impact. And the reality is that while we need to push for that, nobody really knows if we are in a position to actually prevent it from coming, okay? That's one thing. The second point when you think about the problem is that much of the world is blind to weather data. So you were fortunate to explore the impact of the weather in the tropics on the US, but the reality is that once you go south of the border to Mexico, all the way to Brazil, you don't know where it's raining in real time even. The monitoring is so bad. The infrastructure that NOAA has put in the US doesn't exist in most of the world. And the weather data and forecasts that are available, they're quite confusing and inconsistent when it comes to decision makers that are operators and are not scientists like you guys. They don't understand weather data, even though they're impacted by that. So obviously, the result of that is that the costs of those events are only becoming higher and bigger. Businesses and organizations are relatively reactive to this problem. And there isn't providers that actually help solve problems at scale. Let's even think about the National Weather Service, right? When you have so many businesses, so many people, so many operations that happen in parallel, a group of meteorologists in every state, in every county, cannot help everyone get ready. It's a very manual process, and you need technology to help you solve that. So in the context of business, I'm not sure if you're aware, but recently there is a good development in the US that is a little bit behind Europe and Japan. And it's everything related to ESG reporting. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. I highly recommend you guys to read more about that. But as part of it, reporting the climate risk for a public company is becoming an obligation, which is great. But it's beyond it's beyond just a disclosure. We need to actually start thinking about not only, okay, what does it mean for me, but also what do I do about it? My company's hypothesis is that everything related to climate security is really going to become the new cybersecurity, because you don't envision any boardroom or CEO or even the dean here thinking about their IT exposure, saying, hey, I have a few servers that are completely exposed and I can get hacked. That's it. You have to do something about it, right? Otherwise you will be held accountable for that. And similarly, there's a lot that can be done. Yeah, we cannot build, of course, a wall around Miami this afternoon. And we cannot sell our entire portfolio of assets this afternoon. But we can definitely put a software solution in place pretty fast, within an hour, that will help us be much more proactive about what's coming and do that. So it leads me to talk a little bit about what we're doing, and that's really our mission as a company. We want to equip humanity with the weather intelligence, and we'll talk about what it means, intelligence, needed to adapt in our era of climate crisis. And what we're trying to do for our customers, if it's countries or if it's businesses, is to help them manage their climate security challenges with those solutions that we bring to the table. So I want to also talk a little bit about the problem of weather forecasting from a business perspective a little bit. I'm not sure how much you're familiar with that. I'll try to give you a little bit of a different answer or angle, sorry. Let's talk about the technology, right? How do we create a weather forecast? I don't need to teach you that or share anything new. Observations, what's happening in real time, models into which you assimilate the observations, and computing power to process the model. And that entire value chain is done by governmental agencies operationally. Now, it sounds very natural to you, but how many domains in the world do you know that are as important as weather forecasting that are still led by governmental agencies? Imagine we needed to rely on COVID-19 vaccine development on some governmental agency. No way we would have had a vaccine by now. And I'm saying it as someone who served in the military for 11 years. There's no more technology in the world, even technologies used by government, that are still completely developed by governmental agencies. The pace of innovation, by definition, cannot match what can happen. And it's also criticism to the private sector that doesn't do enough about it. The second point is that really once you go outside of the US and Western Europe and Japan, the world is relatively blind to weather data because, again, going back to Central America and South America and Africa and India, these countries do not have NOAA. They rely on the GFS model, the ECMWF model as their baseline, as their real-time data. They don't have radars. They don't have a lot of observations. And the last point is that businesses, even though impacted by weather, they don't really know how to link data to actions. Just let's give an example. A restaurant owner or manager, she doesn't know how to read an output of a weather model and link it to, should I have more people, less people, close the patio or whatnot. Now, an industry around this problem evolved, but the wrong type of industry. You're probably familiar with all kinds of brands related to weather apps and things like that. What you need to know is that they're all just repackaging the outputs of the governmental models, not even the models themselves, the outputs of the models. So every time a new GFS file is coming up in the bucket, they're just taking it, taking the ECMWF, blending it a little bit, and resell it. So no one from the private sector actually pushed the envelope on the science and tried to do something about it. The next point is that one of the challenges in trying to serve this problem is that there is this multi-vertical complexity. And what do I mean by that? Think about Uber, the NFL, Delta Airlines. They're all impacted by weather very differently. And in each of them, there's a different person in the organization that would care about it. Unlike if you sell a cybersecurity solution, it doesn't matter. You sell it to the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, that needs to protect computers in different verticals. Doesn't matter if it's Bank of America or the Red Sox. And because you cannot solve that problem, or couldn't until today, let's call it, solve that problem, then those providers actually became service providers that sell meteorologist support over the phone or via email, and that's obviously a very manual process that is not scalable, not from the organization perspective, not from the business perspective, and not from the customer perspective. Because again, if you need to protect multiple locations and multiple centers of operations, it's hard to rely on a service. And lastly, as I said, they just provide this raw data and not actionable insights, which is not what customers understand. So I want to dive a little bit about the problem of observations. Obviously, there are many types of important observations, but probably the most important one is radar coverage. It's important both for real-time applications, okay, understanding what happened even for parametric insurance, understanding what's happening in real time, and also assimilating it into the short-term forecast and whatnot. And let's show it in a different way. This is radar coverage. It's unbelievable. And 2 points about that. 5 billion people live outside of radar coverage. So 5 billion people do not have access to farmers insurance, flood alerts that are reliable. When you fly to Cancun, the pilot doesn't know the weather in the airport or around the airport until they actually see it, which is usually too late. And I can go on and on and on into all kinds of implications and how sectors of the economy suffer from that. The next point is that the oceans and the seas are not covered with radars. That's why NOAA is flying the hunters over hurricanes, right, in the middle of the Atlantic. Why do they do that? To get a scan, send it back to the models so we can understand if it's going to be category 1, 2, 3, where it's going to hit. Rest assured, nobody's flying anything over cyclones or typhoons. Obviously, the Pacific is not covered, so everything related to Santa Ana winds forecast is also limited because of the lack of observations. So it's a big problem. So now what? And how do we try to help in that problem? And I want to say, listen, we're not NOAA. We don't have $7 billion budget. We're a small business trying to do things that are way over our head, but we're trying. And that's what we're trying to do. So first of all, we are a SaaS software as a service company, okay? We created a product that is a software product that is growing pretty fast. We'll talk about what it does, but we started the business in 2016. I was still a student in Harvard, and got our first customer in 2018. Today we're about 200 employees, a little over. A lot of PhDs in atmospheric science from UCAR, NCAR, MIT, and such. The second thing is that we're not just a web application that repackage some data from NOAA or something. We actually try to do meaningful technology and deep technology from physical models. We have our own version of NWP. We have our own version of nowcasting models. And we're even launching our own satellites. We'll talk about that. And lastly, we're trying to create meaningful impact. Meaningful impact both environmentally, socially, and helping also businesses have better governance. You can see some of the customers that use us, but it's a unique combination. There aren't many companies that are both kind of like a software product with unique technology that is very advanced, as well as with meaningful mission trying to do something good for the world. And let me describe a little bit what we're trying to do. So I would say we're a little bit like three companies at one. But eventually, we are a business intelligence solution. We're not just a forecast service or just data provider. We're trying to look at a problem from a perspective of how do we help customers make better decisions. Sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to be more accurate. It means that you have to do what it takes to make the customer safer and more efficient. So here on the right, you can see the product. That's what we're actually selling. The product is providing both hyperlocal environmental data on a global scale. And the second thing is that it provides business insights and recommendations for actions. So it's not just the temperature will be X, the wind will be Y, but it also means hold the train, cancel the game, do X, do Y, which for many customers, this is all they understand and all they need. Now, behind that software product, we built our own forecasting engine. Not because we think we're smarter than NOAA, but because we can move faster than NOAA, and we can be focused on a business problem and not on just public safety. And we can innovate. So I said we're three companies at once. So the first thing, we have a sensing and space unit based out of Cape Cod and the West Coast, some distributed team. We started with a novel approach of let's look at all kinds of devices around us. We called it Weather of Things, and try to sense weather out of it, like connected vehicles, wipers, and temperature sensors, and IoT devices, and even cellular signal attenuation, reverse engineering, and all kinds of things that can indicate weather. But the biggest advancement and the most meaningful one is our intention to launch our own satellite starting this year. I'll talk more about that. The second unit is a weather modeling unit based out of Boulder, Colorado. Basically doing both nowcasting models, NWP, and ensembles that are using our own models and obviously governmental models that are available. And lastly, we have the product group that is focused on building this software, which is based out of Tel Aviv in Israel. So these are like three companies at one, but really we're trying to make sure that we're innovating on each element of the value chain. So that's how it looks like. You see the product at the end. I have a few slides to show you the product. It's a visual platform with an API for developers. We also have a consumer app. You're welcome to download. But behind it, there is an all complete architecture of data collections, weather modeling, cloud computing and such, and everything is fitting our own product. So a little bit more about that. We started with this unique data collection. How do we look at, for example, aircraft data from the avionics, and how do we make sure that we can assimilate it? Then we turned it into our own modeling, not just using, HRRR or the GFS and such models. Created byproducts, all kind of data layers that are important for our customers, like air quality or flood index, or even running hydro models on top of our own NWP. And this is really eventually feeding the software. So our customers don't really care about all of that. That's important to understand if you think about it from a business perspective. They just want to know what to do, okay? They want single source of truth. They want to have predictive insights. And they want automation, because with automation, you can address challenges at scale. If you have thousands of real estate assets across the country, you cannot have a manual process where you ask someone, every hour or every minute, what's going to happen here, what's going to happen then, and make a decision. You have to manage it very differently. So let's start by untapping a little bit what we're doing. What do we do about that problem? So we want to get to that position where we have full coverage. Obviously, it's not scalable and not doable to do it on the ground. It's just impossible. It's too expensive. So we went to NASA, to JPL, and we asked them, what do you do about it? And you have the GPM. It's a great radar. But what's next? Nothing. We went to NOAA. Nothing. We went to Lockheed Martin. Nobody planned to do anything about it. And then we said, okay, maybe there is an opportunity. So bottom line, we developed our own radar. We kind of took the GPM. The GPM cost, anyone can guess what's the cost of the GPM? It's a single radar.
Who's the launch?
Sorry?
Who's the launch?
Who's the launch?
Yeah, with including.
Oh, yeah, everything, end to end, all the program.
1.5 billion?
$1 billion, yeah. So that's only one radar that samples every point on Earth every 3 days. Not very useful, right, for weather forecasting. So we took that and tried to minimize it into kind of like a mini fridge size, about 100 kilos. And starting this year, we're going to launch the first satellite. So we developed a radar, a Ka-band radar, that when we finish the constellation deployment of about 30 satellites, we're going to have a refresh rate of about 1 hour on every point, including over the ocean. So hopefully that will save the poor pilots need to ride over the Atlantic. So that's huge. That's big. That's really going to help not only weather forecasting, it will actually help climate scientists because it will improve significantly the monitoring of rainfall over Brazil and Africa and other locations where that's, by the way, the original idea behind the GPM, global precipitation measurement. It's about climate modeling. So that's a really big thing we're very proud of. You can see here some information about what we're going to do with that. It's a multi-sensor weather satellite constellation. It's going to help us with ocean surface winds, 3D temperature and water, vapor profile, precipitation, of course. Think about global nowcasting, and sea surface and wave height. So that will be one step in trying to bring the same data quality from the US to everyone in the world. That's pretty exciting for us. You can see what it will look like from a product perspective. So that's quite exciting and hopefully will help improve forecast skills by a lot. So you can see a little bit what's the evolution of it looks like from this first version all the way to the GPM, the rain cubes. And of course, that what we're doing, just like what SpaceX, SpaceX didn't invent the rocket, but they focused on a very specific element, such as many elements, but specifically, let's say, how to land the rocket and make it reusable. It's big. It's very important, but it's not what NASA came to the world to do. But they built their entire technology on top of decades of research, and that's exactly what we're doing. That's how it's going to look like, the first 2 satellites. So starting the launches this year. It looks pretty cool. So we are trying to solve the biggest problem of sensing on a global scale. We have our own models, right, that we assimilate our own observations and other observations into. And since we are controlling our own models and we don't just repackage, we can fine-tune the models to customers' problems. For example, wind accuracy for wind farms or precipitation for places where flood is an issue, and on and on. But eventually, we're doing all of it in order to create this product. So what is the product and how customers use it? I want to show you a few examples. Because I think you will find it interesting to see how science can create real-life impact in this context and pretty fast. So the first thing is that the product provides the data, the output of our models, and not just the publicly available ones. The second thing is that the product is a software, and not just a software. It's actually software that is easily configurable for every job in every vertical. Remember, we talked about the NFL and Uber and Delta. So we created one product that everyone can use. You can easily configure it to your own needs. And lastly, it doesn't just stop at the raw data. It actually tells you what to do, which helps you address targets or customers that don't really understand data. The idea here is to move to operational risk management, to help customers really look at their operations, if it's moving cars from one place in the country to another, if it's getting electricity to people's homes, or if it's running a game, the Super Bowl, and giving you recommendation and ability to make decision to optimize for it. So we created this vertical agnostic platform. You can see here the library of what it does, and you can see it a little bit how the product looks like. Very modern UX UI. I think you can agree with me that the portal of NOAA doesn't look like that, right? And it sounds maybe funny or not important. It's super important because people today work with modern tools. And it's just not the way governmental entities are designed to operate. It's part of it. So just want to look at, one thing I want to show you here, this is like part of our product is this template library. I don't know if you can see, but you have here a list of industries: aviation, agriculture, construction, energy, utilities, insurance, intermodal, on-demand. The idea is that just like Microsoft Excel, right? Everyone uses Excel. Doesn't matter for what. You use it differently. You have different tabs. You can create one tab to do budget, the other tab to do something completely different. And you can use templates. And that's the way we kind of like design the product, where you can come, you can take a template that is related to your specific job, and then you can configure it and build your own use cases without the need in talking to us. And I think this is the biggest difference, because that's from our software, by the way. This is how weather data looks like, right? Numbers over time series. And I'm saying it as a pilot who needed to make operational decisions based on it. I was running squadron operations. Eventually, I had to constantly call the meteorology department and say, hey, what's going to happen in that location tonight and in that location, and then do in my head this, okay, what does it mean? Can we do it? Can we not? Take some notes. Obviously, after a couple of hours, the model completely changed. I had to do it again. So it doesn't matter if you show it on a graph, it's still the same process. It's hard to make decisions based on it. I'm just looking at one location. Imagine that I cared about a route or multiple locations, okay? So we moved from data to insights. For example, this is a dashboard for autonomous trucking operations. And here you can see a specific segment of the route, a specific time, okay, 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., where what we tell to the customer, hey, human intervention is required because of heavy fog or no visibility. Either pull off to side of road or have human driver assume control of the vehicle. Now, imagine that you could integrate that via API data feed to the truck. So you don't even need anyone to look at this screen and make a decision. It's just going automatically to the truck. That's what we did. This is an API as well. You can actually take an API key, and from that moment, your Tesla will tell you exactly what will be the impact of the low temperature along the route on your specific vehicle battery range. So you can do really cool stuff when you think about what you're trying to do, help customers make decisions. This is just one example. If I could literally do it here, I would show you that you can click on that and go to another tab that will tell you when to staff more people in the restaurant, when to close the patio, when to make sure you have more ice cream, one example. Or if you're a real estate owner, when to burst pipes before cold night, or what. It can be anything. So with that, we were truly able to get a lot of kind of customers. You can see airlines, railways, shipping, utilities, insurance, sports organization like the US Open Tennis, the NFL, on-demand companies like Uber, and even the government. The US Air Force, NOAA, and NASA are using our solutions. And they're all using the same product. So we were able to create one product that works for everyone and helps them make the decision. So the use cases are incredible. When you think about climate security and adaptation, it can be anywhere from airlines' daily management of operations, utilities avoiding outages, insurance companies alerting policyholders, and on and on and on. Really a lot of use cases. It's kind of like endless. And when you think about the trend of businesses and what we need to expect businesses to do and the responsibility we need to demand from them, then the beauty of it is that everything related to sustainability, how to be more responsible for the community, how to be more responsible to the employees, to the environment, it goes hand in hand with operational efficiency. When you try to be kind for the environment and for your employees, you can actually achieve amazing ROI from a business perspective. And I want to show you a few examples. So here you can see some, simple examples like supply chain, how to mitigate goods spoilage, which is obviously preventing losses and such, but at the same time, it also improves the bottom line. So a couple of really cool examples. This is an airline in the US, a pretty big one, and that airline was experiencing snowstorm. I assume everyone here sat in an airplane when you had to do the icing, right? But when there's high wind together with a snowstorm, you're not allowed to do the icing because you may damage the aircraft with the boom and such. In that case, you have to cancel flights. The HRRR and the GFS basically predicted high wind above the threshold for the entire day. But we are running higher resolution model with higher frequency, and our model predicted a specific 45 to 60 minutes where the wind was lowering below the threshold. And it popped up as an alert to the operator in Minneapolis airport and told them, hey, you can actually do the icing for an hour. They were able to pull out between 60 to 70 flights. That's a $2 million decision out of the gate. So you see how better modeling and, of course, sensing and software that helps you make the right decision in the right time can actually create saving. In this example from JetBlue, the guys found out over there that in the last 5 years, they had more wind events than in the last 20 years. So wind events, windy days basically became much more frequent. And their entire protocol didn't match. It forced them to cancel and hold flights too frequently. We helped them see that by just providing them the right information around it. Another example is around everything related to fluid used for the icing. So two things about that. That fluid is very polluting. Okay, it's not good for the environment. That green stuff on the airplane, not good. The second thing is that it's expensive, extremely expensive. So if you can save the waste of it, you can achieve two things, right? Again, going back to the intersection between sustainability and operational efficiency. So our dashboard is now telling them in every minute of the day and every hour of the week what fluid type to use and what de-icing procedure they should use, instead of looking at multiple parameters that constantly changing and trying to do it, think about what it means. So it helps them waste less. This is a really cool example that I really like. How are we with timing? Let's see. Okay. So this is a mining facility company, pretty big in Latin America. When you blast a mine, it creates a lot of dust. And usually those mines are not in the middle of nowhere. They're actually next to nearby towns and such. And that blasting activity is polluting those communities. We created a dashboard for them that tells them when not to blast, because the wind conditions are carrying the dust to the city. So they were able to be friendlier to their neighbors and pollute way less, and also avoid fines that they get from the regulator for polluting and damaging the city. Obviously, they're bragging about it and putting it in their sustainability report and whatnot. And the last example I'll give on the enterprise and customers piece is IndiGrid. It's a utility company in India. They subscribed to our software in March of 2020, right before COVID started. And a couple of months later, a pretty big cyclone was hitting the country. And our dashboard told them, hey, pre-position crews next to 3 towers out of 300 towers they had in a region. Why? Because that's where most of the damage will happen. So you need to recover fast, put the people over there. They listen to that, and they say that without this recommendation, they would have had an outage to 100 million people during COVID-19 lockdown. That's huge. Now, you have 10,000 utilities in the world. We're going to have more cyclones, typhoons, hurricanes, and you can help with the software implementation. Well, I'll skip also, this is a cool use case about the US Open tennis, when to close, when to open. We do that as well. Smart building, you can start the cooling much faster if you can predict that it's going to be hotter in the next few hours. You can, with API, automate the energy system to start earlier, but at milder temperature and save energy. So all kinds of things that you can do with that. And I'll just finish by saying, talking about our work with the governmental agencies. So we're not trying to replace the government, the opposite. We're trying to augment what the government is doing. It's just there's no way that the government will innovate and come up with solutions very fast like startups can. So this is an example of US Air Force agreement that we achieved a few months ago to start using our constellation when it's becoming available. So they're part of the funding of this. We're very proud of that. Another example is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the EPIC program of NOAA. Basically, it's part of the nation's effort to take advanced operational modeling and put it in the cloud so the community can collaborate around it. And Tomorrow.io is the architect of that project, working with NOAA and helping putting the UFS in the cloud so the community can improve it and make a better model for all of us. So this is another example of how we try to help not only businesses, but also the government. And yeah, I think what I really wanted to show you today is how, first of all, climate change is not just about trying to prevent it. It's also about how do we deal with the consequences of it today. And there's a lot we can do today. But it takes a combination of science, software, and business approach. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people and businesses and countries take control of what's coming. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Shimon. Very interesting, and hopefully some of our own entrepreneurs at the school will follow your steps and open companies that maybe will be competing with you, but also could collaborate. And I'm going to pass the mic to Jennifer, who is going to manage the questions for Shimon. Thank you.
Did you unplug yourself?
No, I'm fine.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. It was fascinating. I feel like you've covered a lot of things, and we have some questions. We're going to take some questions right now from the audience. If anybody has a question, you'll raise your hand, and we have people standing by with a microphone, and you can just ask your question to Shimon. And we'll also take some questions from online. I will be asking those. Anyone have a question here?
How much is the cost of each of your satellites, out of curiosity?
The cost of each satellite? Roughly, it starts with about $5 million per unit, and we're trying to get it as low as $2.5 to $3 million as we scale. Yeah.
Next question.
I'm interested in what one satellite can actually see. What kind of resolution does it have compared to, for example, a typical WSR or NexRad radar?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's roughly, the first version will be roughly 5 kilometers resolution. So it's not a replacement for NexRad or the likes. But it can augment NexRad in mountainous areas where it has coverage issues. It can also do better job probably in the higher altitude. And of course, in many places it's binary, you know, it's from nothing to something. So hopefully we'll be able to increase the resolution over time.
Hi. How do you quality control your data over the regions that have the sparse radar?
Very challenging, obviously. So right now, the most reliable observation is like ESOS stations and METARs. The rest is really, you know, even when you have stations that are not well calibrated by people and they lose calibration, it can be very, very biased. So we use the available stations, where mostly airports, let's put it this way. And we also use our customers. We have customers in all kinds of locations, regions, and they sometimes install their own stations and record data. And we try to understand also that, you know, I don't need to explain it to you guys, you can never be perfect. But if you can show an improvement in skills over other available models, that's good. So a lot of comparisons are done against other models as well.
And Shimon, in the same vein as Bob's question regarding the resolution, I'm also interested to know how often do you come back on the same target with your satellites? It's not geostationary, is it?
No, it's low orbit, and yeah, the idea is less than an hour over every point. Yeah, that's where we're trying to get.
We have a couple of questions online, and I don't know, one of these may sort of overlap with these last couple of questions here, but it says you haven't talked about verification of your forecast and temperature, rainfall, et cetera. What are your short-term and your long-term forecast skill statistics?
Yeah, so it's a 50-page report to answer that. It depends on where. The statistic in Boston is not the same as in New York or in Mumbai, obviously. Temperature, wind, precipitation obviously are very different. But we try to do validation and verification and looking at metrics like mean absolute error and such. And we try to compare ourselves all the time against the HRRR, the GFS, the eSIM-WF, other regional models like the JMA and others. And in one event, you don't always exceed the accuracy, but the idea is to look back at 6 to 12 months and show consistent average improvement. We try to be around 20 to 30% more accurate in some metrics. When it comes to nowcasting, we actually get much higher improvements because with nowcasting you can get into binary improvements. Obviously, in most places in the world, when you rely on a model that updates every 6 hours, but you update your nowcasting every few minutes, then by definition you can achieve improvement on skills. But yeah, it's a complicated answer, we actually asked Embry-Riddle University a year ago to run a validation for us as a third party. If there is anyone who's interested in doing a project of putting an independent report on our validation, you're welcome to reach out to me.
How many satellites does it take to cover the world, and how many do you have so far?
So as I said, our first launch is in October of this year. Of those, I showed a picture of those first 2 satellites we're launching, and we plan to finish the launches by 2024 of about 30 satellites. That's what it takes to get to, obviously you can put as many as you want to get to revisit time that is close to real time, but about 30 will be sufficient to get to less than an hour revisit time.
And a follow-up for that, will this data from the constellation of satellites be available for researchers?
Definitely.
And I had an early question. Could this data be provided for a pedestrian, an individual who is sometimes on foot, sometimes commuting over an entire day, an individual's changing journey over a period of a day?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you can use our app today, again, tomorrow.io, look for it. It's free, even though it will ask you to do a subscription, so take note. And even in the consumer app, we try not to just give, hey, rain will start in 25 minutes. We try to tell you what activity is recommended for the day or for the hour. The best activity we recommend is went to Netflix and chill.
So this is sort of similar to that as well. It says, do you have individual customers? So it sounds like you do.
Yeah.
And how is the customer pricing adjusted to cities, corporations, and individuals?
Yeah, so for individuals, it's a freemium model, meaning you download the app, you can use it for free, but you'll have ads. If you want to get rid of the ads and get more features, you buy a subscription. That's one world. On the business world, we price based on geography unit. How many locations you're monitoring, meaning how many warehouses for a logistic company, how many airports for an airline, and on and on.
Do we have some more questions from the audience here?
Yeah, I have another one. So you spoke about the price of generating or producing one of the satellites, but a big component of the cost is also launching the satellites, right?
Yeah, it's
So-
included.
It's included.
Yeah.
So who is doing that for this price?
SpaceX.
SpaceX.
Yeah. Thanks to SpaceX, we're going to see a lot of Earth observation satellites in the next few years because it really reduced the cost significantly. So Elon Musk is a genius.
We have more questions here in the audience? I think we're good. Then that will conclude our questions tonight. Thank you so much. And for anyone who was unable to join us tonight, or if you have friends that like to see this, it will be on our YouTube channel, and it'll also be posted on Facebook, and we'll follow up with a link to the video of tonight's lecture series. If you would like to know, please join us on March 15th for our next Sea Secrets lecture with Bradley Moore on reading and writing the genetic code of marine life to cure human disease. Thank you all, and have a good evening. Thank you so much.